Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, OT Security in Practice, Lessons from the Energy Sector. My name is Willemijn Rodenburg, and I'll be guiding you through this session. Before we begin, a few practical notes. We are inviting you to submit your questions in the Q&A section throughout the session. I'll keep an eye on them and bring them into the conversation with our speakers. And at the end, we also reserve some time for the Q&A as well. So this session is being recorded, and we will share the recording with all participants afterwards. Thanks again for joining us, and let's dive in. So the OT world we knew around 10 years ago no longer exists. What used to be closed and stable is now decentralized, smart, and connected. And that makes our energy systems more efficient, but it also makes them more vulnerable. The attacks we're seeing today are no longer hypothetical. And that's exactly what this webinar is about. So 3 experts with different perspectives we will share lessons from the field are within this webinar today. The first speaker of today is Godfried Boshuizen. And Godfried is an OT cybersecurity expert at Stedin and lead consultant at CC Security. And he will walk us through what OT looks like from the inside and what's changing as our energy systems become more decentralized. The second speaker is Gerben van der Leij. Gerben is an OT cybersecurity consultant at Ox OT with over a decade of consultancy experience helping industrial and critical operations build robust security. And he will share concrete steps to secure your OT environment based on the December 2025 attack on the Polish energy infrastructure. And last but not least, Troy Gatema will share practical use cases from the field. And Troy is partner manager at Centaurn, working with integrators and end users across Europe on high assurance OT security. So, on to our first speaker of today, Godfried Boshuizen. May I ask you to share the operator's perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Willemijn, for the introduction. I'm going to shed some light on what's happening within the energy sector and the OT cybersecurity area in general. But first, I will start with a little bit of astrology. And for the people who don't follow or are not interested in astrology, this year is the Chinese year of the fire horse. And the reason I start with this slide in astrology is if you look at what does it mean, the year of the fire horse. Well, it's every 60 year the year of the fire horse returns. And the main aspects of the year of the fire horse is that everything goes much faster and much more intense in the year of the fire horse. That's the reason I choose this topic in this slide, because if you look at security and cybersecurity, we can definitely say that everything is moving quite fast in the last period, especially this year. A lot of cyber breaches, of data breaches, also critical data breaches. If you look, for example, at the Odido data breach, where there's lots of customer data is out on the street. But also, if you look at the Zero Clock web page or Zero Day Clock web page, the time to exploit has decreased quite rapidly. And the time to expand is time between a vulnerability being discovered and an exploit is ready on the market to exploit the vulnerability being found. And if you look back a couple of years, it used to be even multiple years sometimes before hackers found a way to exploit a vulnerability. It has been quite a long time, around a day, 2 days, 1 day, but a couple of weeks ago it dropped even below the 1 day barrier, and it's now going to hours basically. Now, of course, one of the reasons that the time to exploit is decreasing so rapidly is AI. if you look at all the news around Mythos, an AI model of Anthropic, claiming that it can easily detect and exploit vulnerabilities, you can imagine that, or see the reason why this time to exploit is decreasing so rapidly. An important remark, I'm not going into all the details around Mythos because I can spend an hour and a lot of blogs and news posts and hypes and around it. But I think one of the important things to remember is that AI is not really changing the way cyber attacks take place. It's still the same, for example, phishing or pushing over a firewall, or and so the modus operandi is not really changing yet, but what is changing is the speed that it happens. So that's the year of the fire horse. With AI, you can, and back in the days, you need a large army of hackers finding an exploit, and nowadays you can easily ask AI to make an exploit for a vulnerability. So that's something to keep in mind, that time is no longer on your side. If you look at OT and the OT threat landscape, that's not really an exciting topic, basically. And the reason I say that is that if you look at OT malware, so that's OT native malware, that's malware specifically designed to run on or against OT devices or hardware. There's not that much malware found or being produced. If you look at the last 15, 16 years, it started, of course, with Stuxnet. That's a well-known malware built, what they say, by the Americans and the Israelis to take out the nuclear facilities in Natanz in Iran. But if you look over the years, it's mostly stateful actor related malware. But there's not that much being discovered. Most of the attacks you see, for example, the Jaguar case last year is a good example, is often IT being ransomwared or via IT being OT landscapes attacked. For example, Jaguar, there was ransomware on their SIP systems, on the MES systems, the systems in the IT landscape that control or send information to the OT landscape. And basically what happened is every car is a one-off. So if you don't know which cars to produce because you don't have access to your central ERP system where all the orders are in, you can't produce any cars. So what they did, because they didn't know which cars to produce, they shut down the factory. Same goes with Colonial Pipeline. There wasn't a problem in the OT systems. There was a problem in the IT systems. And they didn't know what was going through the pipeline. They didn't know how to bill, what to bill to customers. So they decided to shut down the pipeline. So that's an important thing to remember, is that a specific OT related malware, it's often stateful actors involved. But yeah, mostly IT is the path into OT, or the IT is causing outages in OT. If you look at the power grid, and the power grid of tomorrow is becoming a decentralized power grid. It used to be a centralized power grid with energy plants, for example, a nuclear power plant hooking up to the grid, and a grid operator, for example, like Steden, where I'm working at the moment, made sure that the electricity being produced was delivered to the customer on the other end. And that was a rather simple architecture. But what you see that's developing at the moment is a decentralized power grid, and it's called for distributed energy resources. For example, wind farms, solar parks, producing electricity, and there are quite a lot of them. If you look at the North Sea, it's completely filled with windmills. The same goes for solar farms. They're being developed everywhere. And these distributed systems are causing a challenge to the power grid. One of the main thing of an electric power grid is that you can't really store the electricity. So once it's produced, it has to be consumed on the other end as well. You can put in some batteries, and that's small pilots are starting with using batteries into the power grid. But basically, if you want to maintain your net stability, once it's produced, you have to use it. And that's the challenge with, if you have just one single power plant, it's quite easy to scale it up or down a bit according to the need of the electricity. But if you have a lot of decentralized systems, you have to look at how much is every system producing. So if it's more sunny than predicted, it can, and solar park can produce a lot more power than the prediction was. Same goes for wind, if it's a windy day. So grid operators want to see how much is produced, and in case of an problem with the net stability, they want to scale down or scale up the distributed systems. And that's one of the things that went wrong in Poland at the end of last year. And Gerben will go into more detail what happened there. But that's basically a problem that the net operators couldn't see how much was produced, and also didn't have the opportunity to scale up or down anymore. So that's one of the challenges with modern power grids. If you look more on a higher level, if you look at the challenges between IT and OT and cybersecurity in general in production areas, this slide is, in my opinion, often the base of problems or challenges, I should say, where IT is from original related on a more office type of environment, people sitting behind a desk, behind computers, doing their work. And on the right side, people in OT working on a refinery, oil platform, power plant, whatever. Different kind of people, different kind of language. And that's one of the first challenges you see in combined landscapes, is that people speak different languages. And once you speak different languages, it can be a problem with understanding each other. So, for example, the CIA triad, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. OT landscapes used to be a lot of availability. The systems have to work. But for example, in electricity, I just mentioned there, we want to see how much electricity is produced in a wind farm. Integrity is getting more important. So getting on the same page is important for see it as one problem, one overall view on cyber is speaking the same language. Another thing I often still see is basic hygiene. If you look at the situation in Poland, basic hygiene was one of the problems. Make sure that your systems are up to date. If you look at, for example, the NIS2 directive, it was not invented or to harass you. The main goal of the NIS2 directive is to get cybersecurity on a more mature level with critical infrastructure companies. So also, if you don't have to be compliant with the NIS2, you still can have a look at the measurements and the controls that are described in the NIS2 directive to get your cybersecurity landscape on a more mature level. So don't see it as harassment, but look at the basic measurements also on the NCSC website as a way to get a more mature cybersecurity and IT and OT landscape. Another thing I often hear in OT environment is we can't patch We don't have the time to patch. Patch is taking a long period before we can implement the patch. And also we don't know if the factory will explode once we install the patch. And sometimes even suppliers of OT hardware say if you change anything in the system, your warranty is voided, so you can't patch. You still can have a decent patch policy and know what you can patch and you can't patch. So that's one thing to make sure that's in place. And also, if you can't patch, make sure that you have a good risk inventarization on what the risks are using all the systems, and also make sure that there are mitigation actions in place. Still, for example, there's still Windows 95 in critical infrastructure in Holland. But as long as you take mitigating actions, you can at least reduce the risks not able being to patch. Another thing I often see is this kind of network or in general architecture is the watermelon architecture. It's hard on the outside, soft on the inside. So once a cybersecurity criminal or cyber criminal is in your system or in your network, it's quite easy. They can quite easy move around, lateral movement, east-west traffic, no matter how you call it. But it's the blast radius of an incident can be quite large because there's not much protection once they're within the parameter of your systems or within the parameter of your network or factory. So if you look at your architecture, it's better to have an onion-like approach, things like zero trust or least privilege architecture, good role-based access control, security by design, all topics that are very hip with marketing departments of security companies. But it does make sense to look at your architecture this way. Zero trust is already like 10, 12 years old, I think. And it's a good way to reduce the blast radius of a cybersecurity incident. So once they get in and assume breach, make sure that you have the proper mitigation actions, like for example zero trust in place to reduce this blast area. So if I want to recap the three most important things, first of all, make sure you speak the same language. Do fun things together. Go for dinner and make sure the IT and the OT guys are on the same page. Make sure your basic hygiene is in order and you have the proper mitigation actions and also all the basic measurements to make sure that your landscape is up to date. And make sure that your architecture is in a secure manner implemented to reduce the blast range of an incident. Well, that's for me for now. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Godfried, for sharing your perspective. It's very good to hear your view on how IT and OT is converging and how these, let's say, cultural worlds are connected, but are also very different. It gives us a good insight, and it grounds the conversation about what actually happens on the floor and what measurements should be taken. I mentioned in the beginning that you can ask questions in the Q&A. It was disabled for the first 10 minutes, but it's now enabled. So if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A section to ask your question. On to our next speaker of today. We're now shifting to the integrator's perspective. So how do you translate those operational realities into concrete steps to secure an OT environment? And Gerben van der Leij, who's now on stage, will walk us through that. So floor is yours, Gerben.
Yes, thank you very much, Willemijn. And to tackle this topic, I will take a very concrete example. And it's a very well-documented example. And it's the attack on the Polish energy grid. December 29 last year, And the documentation I used for this is from the CERT Polska and from the Dragos report that was published. And so what happened on December 29, on a cold day, just before New Year's Eve, a series of electricity sites were attacked by what we believe to be a state actor. So there was 30 renewable energy sites, one big combined heat and power plant, and also, oddly enough, one manufacturer that seems to be unrelated. And the consequence of the attack was that that for those 30 sites, the grid operator lost visibility, the owner lost remote access, and damage in the sites was destroyed. The electricity grid itself remained stable and operational, which I believe is mainly due to the still highly centralized nature of the Polish energy grid. And what's good to realize is that the timing of the attack was chosen. It's not that that was by incident that there was the time. No, the attack started long before the trigger was pulled. It started likely somewhere in summer, and initial access was gained. And only on December 29 did they decide, now we pull the trigger, and now we basically take these sites down. And from a technical perspective, what happened? All the sites used FortiGate firewalls from Fortinet, and those firewalls were compromised earlier in the year, and so the attackers had access and that they could use at some later point. On December 29 in the morning, they went into the networks and basically did as much damage as they could. So they overwrote PLC firmware with garbage, basically. They wiped configurations, they wiped files, anything they could to do damage. And they also took down the firewalls themselves, basically closing the door behind them, but also taking away remote access for the people that owned the site. And a good thing to realize is that at those sites, the Fortinet firewalls were doing remote access, were the firewall, and were also doing the segmentation. So the security was combined in one device that had exploitable vulnerabilities. And like Godfried mentioned, that's putting all your eggs in one basket is maybe not ideal. And also for high value assets, it makes sense to look at high assurance alternatives rather than doing all in one firewall. However, the combined heat energy site was attacked but did not go down, and it's basically because of the endpoint detection software that was present at the site. So that attack was stopped in progress. And to come back on the effect, so at this point, there were 30 independent sites all attacked at the same time. With a distributed energy grid, balancing the grid becomes harder and harder and harder. Also in the Netherlands, I live in an area where it's no longer possible to get a new electricity subscription. Why? Because balancing the grid is becoming harder. And with more distributed energy on the grid, it becomes super attractive to attack the grid on either a day where there's lots of production, middle of summer, or on a day where there's a lot of demand in winter. And if there's a high demand and or a high supply, then the balancing of the grid gets critical. And if an attacker is able to then perform the attack, there's a high likelihood that somebody can take the grid down. And that's something that happened by accident in Iberia in 2025. I think we can all remember that power outage. And another thing is that the distributed energy sites are unmanned, so they rely on remote access. If the remote access is gone and the control is gone, that basically becomes an issue. Fixing them all at the same time becomes an issue because we likely don't have the staff to do it. And they're operating on thin margins, so likely there's much less security at the distributed sites than at the current more centralized sites. So what can we learn from this? One is that the security device itself was the target, and it was the vector into the network. So one compromised security device enabled the entire attack. So what we can learn is that it makes sense to look at high assurance alternatives, and it makes sense to look at architectures where if one device is compromised, the security is still intact. The second is that basic hygiene seems to work. For the combined heat energy site, the EDR stopped the attack, and so that's evidence that basic hygiene works. However, it may not be enough. Third is survival is not security. The sites were compromised long before the attack happened. So if the people believed we're operational and therefore we might be secure, is likely not true. And the fourth one is the collateral damage. There was one production site that was attacked in exactly the same way as the other sites. I don't know precisely why, but I do know it's collateral damage, and the site was taken down just because other sites were attacked as well. Okay, and then that brings us to the next topic, the security levels.
Thanks, Gerben. It's very interesting to see how the attack on the Polish energy infrastructure occurred and what happened there. So insight in such an incident gives us concrete lessons in how to protect ourselves against such an attack. So thanks again to Gerben. And for our final perspective today, we're now moving to the security specialist view. So welcome to Troy, who's forwarding the stage.
Thank you, Willemijn. As both speakers mentioned it before, basic cyber hygiene correctly implemented makes a huge difference. And one of those things, which is also mentioned in the NIS2 directive, is having a solid security framework in place. And within the industry environments, the most common one used is the IEC 62443. And in this framework, security levels are defined to help structure the process of building a secure environment. Now, IEC defines 4 security levels, where level 4 is created for networks and products that need to withstand the most sophisticated and determined types of attacks. When talking about these operational networks within critical infrastructure, and not only energy, but also, for example, oil and gas, water treatment, public transport, and you consider the world that we live in today with its geopolitical tensions, then these networks are very interesting for these persistent threats like state actors, nation-state hackers. And when you then plot these networks against the let's say IEC 62443's target security levels, they should be considered at least to be level 3 or level 4 networks. So they should be able to withstand these sophisticated and persistent attacks done by hackers who basically have unlimited time and unlimited money. For the companies that approach us for assistance, we get from their use cases now a number of let's say main data streams in which we see that these secure networks, which a lot of times were air-gapped in the past, now become more and more connected to external networks, either to the enterprise network of the company itself or to third-party networks. So the main data streams that we see is the first one, it's monitoring, which is already done in IT for a long time, but now a lot of times also specialized OT monitoring software is being implemented in production environments. And this is then linked to either the enterprise's own SIEM solution and sometimes even to an external security operations center if the knowledge and technology is not available in-house. Other types of data, for example, is historian data, which is used for compliance purposes, reporting, analysis, or process optimization. And the last type of main data stream is what we call asset information. Most of the times it's sent to a cloud environment. That's information coming directly from equipment like electrical motors, and this data is then being processed and analyzed to do predictive maintenance and reduce any unwanted downtime. And as Godfrey mentioned, the time to exploit is decreasing exponentially. So you're just looking at using traditional tools like using a one firewall, for example, and it does contain a vulnerability. You need to be super quick to patch it, and not even to mention the sleepless nights CISO would have when he's thinking about potential zero-day exploits that might already be in the system that we don't know about yet, but is already out there on the dark web, for example. And therefore, companies are looking more and more to different types of solutions. And one of those types of solutions could be a data diode, which allows the information to only flow in one way, and thus preventing any traffic from getting back. So in that case, you can send information out without the risk of a hacker getting into that group. And what you could create in that in such an instance is that a lot of times bidirectional traffic it's required, and in a normal day of operation that's of course fine. But when an anomaly is detected, or when entity thinks they're at risk, a lot of times there's something called the red button principle, where they basically say, okay, we don't trust it anymore. We push the red button, and then the operational network becomes air-gapped again. So no connection in or out. But it also means that you lose your visibility from the OT monitoring system, so you cannot detect any anomalies anymore. And the whole idea is that the production keeps running because you do this. So you also lose any new data from your assets, or from your logging, or from your FOIA historian. So you get a gap in data. And you could mitigate this by using a data diode instead of a firewall in combination with a firewall. So in that case, you would retain your visibility while under attack, so while going in that so-called island mode. And you have, in general, also a mitigation on supply chain breaches. And so what I want to end with is technology is changing quickly, not only for the user side, but also for the hacker side. And AI agents are making it much easier for hackers to, first of all, find vulnerabilities, and then second, exploit those vulnerabilities, or create exploits for those vulnerabilities. So yes, basic cyber hygiene is very important, and being compliant is not enough. So it's not enough to just check all the boxes in the compliance manual. You really need to ask yourself, are we compliant or are we secure? And with that, I want to leave it and give it back to you, Willemijn.
Well, thanks, Troy, for sharing your insights. It's very interesting to hear your view and your perspective, and it really completes the whole picture. So, saying that, before we're moving into the Q&A, I haven't seen any questions yet. No. I'd like to invite you to contribute to an important piece of research we are conducting. So Centaurus is running an OT research study to better understand the current state of the OT sector. If you'd like to participate, you can simply scan the QR code on your screen and sign up. And with that, you show your interest in participating to our research. So feel free to scan the QR code. I'll leave it on the screen for a couple of seconds. Now, on to the Q&A section. Let's open the digital floor for your questions. There are some questions there. Let me see. A question for Godfried. If all the speakers can come back on stage, that would help to give an answer. Question for you, Godfried. What's one thing that surprised you the most when you started looking at the OT security from the inside?
Well, basically, I often said, well, being, for example, in my CISO roles, knowing what you have, so who's on your network and what they're doing there, that's the topic where I got some surprises, for example, in audits or contracts I did. What I still find surprising, and I still see it, is people or companies hooking up either IT but also OT equipment directly to the internet. For example, it's quite easy to control your building management system from home and hooking it up directly to the internet. That's not really a smart thing to do. So that's one thing that sometimes surprises me, but also, for example, the development of IoT. I often say that managers with credit cards are the most dangerous people in a company, because they can easily buy IoT equipment with their credit card without any knowledge or compliance with the IT or the OT security department. And they're hooking up IoT equipment to the network. And sometimes I see, once I saw it in an audit, that, for example, a vending machine that was vending out protection equipment, glasses and earplugs and stuff like that. It was connected to the supplier of the stuff that was in the vending machine, but it was also hooked up onto the local network, because the manager of the technical department find it quite easy to see what the supply levels were in the vending machine, creating a backdoor directly into the factory. So if you look at surprising things, that's, I think, one of the surprising topics is people hooking up stuff to the internet that can cause a lot of problems.
Okay, and a question for maybe Gerben or Troy. On a short term, if I can only do one thing this quarter to improve my OT security posture, what would each of you, so Godfried as well, recommend?
Yes, of course. That depends a lot on where you are, of course. But if I'd make a general list of things that would be very high on my list for anybody, there would be: one, check the remote access, what's there, and is it secure? And two, start with the segmentation and reducing the blast radius. If you do those two things right, you'll have a lot of bases covered.
Yeah, and what I would add to that is really check what types of data streams are going where, and is it always required to have let's say access from both sides. Really think about what information are we sharing with whom, and how is it protected. If you can map that correctly, they're already at step one, I think.
Yeah, and if I can add just one thing is, so knowing what you have, protecting it, and know where the traffic is going, as Gerben and Troy mentioned. So that's also related to asset management, knowing what devices are in your network and where they're talking to. That's what Gerben and Troy said. But also, for example, Troy mentioned island mode, and within a grid operator, we're able to run in island mode. So the grid can run on its own without the IT part of the grid operator environment. But it's a good thing to practice, and it's not only for island mode, but in general. If you want to shut down part of your network, or you want to shut down the connection between OT and IT, it's good to make sure what to do, and also practice this to see whether you run into trouble. Sometimes you forgot one important system that's on IT side, and you push the red button, and then production goes down. So it's good if you want to run in island mode, or you have a more general incident response plan. Have it on paper, that's good, not digital, to make sure that it's available when your systems are down, and practice it. Because first time I did a practice or a tabletop exercise, or how you want to call it, our incident response plan was like 100 pages. It was way too big to be useful. We reduced it to like 4 pages with a clear structure, and we practice it every half year to further improve it. And with practice, you see what's working, what's not working, if everything is up to date. So make sure that everything is available, the right people are there on the phone list, and that's actual, and not people that left the company like 4 years ago. So that's a good thing, and see what's working and not working.
Thanks. Another question in securing the OT environment. What are the biggest challenges in securing the OT environment? Is it the technology itself, ownership within the organization? Maybe, as you mentioned, Godfried, the different language between IT and OT, lack of OT security knowledge. So, can you maybe raise the top 2 of the challenges in OT security?
Well, one big challenge is, besides speaking the same language, often is ownership. You often see that there are 2 departments, the technical department and the IT department. The CISO often is IT related or IT founded or IT background. My point of view is that if you have a CISO, it should be responsible for both IT and OT. Of course, at the end, the board is responsible, especially if you need to be compliant with NIS2 directive. The board is the end responsible, but I would also make the CISO responsible for OT as well. And if he doesn't have the knowledge, OT knowledge, to make a proper judgment on this topic, and make sure there's someone in place, his right hand, that can help him with it. But make it a combined effort. So ownership and combined ownership with one person on top that's responsible helps, instead of discussions between the IT department and the OT department and sub-optimization.
And for you, Gerben, what are your top 2 challenges in OT security?
If I go by the list, I say the technology is hardly ever the problem. So the technology can be made to work. Budget is usually a consequence of ownership. So if people take ownership and take a real hard look at what the present situation is, usually they will be able to budget for what's needed. Like Godfried mentioned, the ownership is a problem, and the communication, especially because OT operations rely on other people for safety, for maintenance, etc., etc. And that's where the communication needs to start. And yes, OT security knowledge is a bottleneck, but often the staffing is also a big bottleneck. And knowing what to do and being able to do it are 2 different things in my experience.
So yes, exactly. That is a combination of all the things. I think also culture is a little bit can become an issue. I think the operational environments are mostly quite conservative. So if you want to introduce new things, people are maybe a little bit scared. And then again, yeah, you need to have a good communication, because it's not only OT anymore. You're going to connect it. So you need to get IT on board. You need to get OT on board. And in that case, I think NIS2 is good, because it brings responsibility to the board. So now these discussions are also going to be held on a board level. And that would help, I think, help a lot to do those things top down.
And I see another question for you, Godfried. What is your view on improving basic hygiene by focusing on the 5 critical controls, SANS, which seem to cover much items you mentioned already?
Yeah, there are a lot of systems out there. SANS is one of them. SIS, the American standard, or NIST. If you look in Holland, you have CIRA, cyber rating, and there's also an OT part now for CIRA. The Belgians have CIFAN, cyber fundamentals, which is also a very pragmatic approach to improve your cyber hygiene and your cyber maturity. It's important that you have a system, and all the systems I mentioned are good systems. ISO 27000 is more like a high-level framework and less pragmatic controls. But things like the SANS or the NIST are very pragmatic, also CIFAN and CIRA. So take a pragmatic framework if you want to start, and stick to it. And that's a very good way to have a structured way on improving your basic hygiene. And the most important thing is just start doing it, because you can do whatever systems or frameworks, but if you do it on paper, then it's more like a compliancy project instead of being a security project. So you do the actions to become more secure and not to become compliant. In Holland, in het Hollands, I say turfsmurven. And that's just ticking the box to be compliant, and that doesn't work. It's good to be or make the auditor happy, but it doesn't necessarily make you more secure. So follow a system, stick to it, and approach it with a pragmatic view.
Sounds like a good plan. Looking at the clock, I think we're already at the end of our webinar. And before we close, I want to thank all speakers of today. So thanks to Godfried Boshuizen, Gerben van der Leij, and Troy Gatema for giving your insights today. And of course, a big thank to all of you joining us today. As mentioned before, the session has been recorded and you will receive the recording within the next 48 hours. So with that, I wish you all a wonderful day. Thank you for being here and hopefully see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.